Welcome to We Have Ways of Making You Talk with me, Al Murray and James Holland. Episode 4 of our Battle of Britain series. Now we're into the attritional phase.
We absolutely are.
In our last episode, we laid out what the Luftwaffe's attempting to do is in 4 days, 3 days, maybe 4, destroy the RAF over England. Yep. And of course, they've not had 3 days, maybe 4 of the weather to allow them to do that. So immediately there is a hitch. But also, the way that the direction of travel in that fighting is very much in favour of Fighter Command. Fighter Command's losses are a fraction of the Luftwaffe's losses, and Fighter Command's ability to make good those losses, to replace the pilots and to replace the airframes it needs, they're in excellent shape. Obviously, there are days of great anxiety, and obviously it's no fun being attacked by the Luftwaffe like this in what seems like a random and uncoordinated effort. And the reason it seems like that
is because it is.
It's because it is.
But if you're German, it's all going swimmingly. Because
exactly.
That's what's being reported. As with in British cinemas or American cinemas, you have your major feature film, but you also have newsreels beforehand. They're repeatedly playing a song in Germany called Bomben auf England, which is a suitably stirring march. And it's got a very kind of sort of in the streets sort of repeating this and chanting it.
Galland after the war said, we pilots could not stand this song from the very start, but that's after the war.
Yeah, you've lost me. Yeah, well, Galland has been summoned. So it's now not just the kind of major commanders that are being summoned to Current Hall, it's also the more junior commanders too. Galland is already in a bad mood on the 17th of August by the kind of faulty tactics and close escort of bombers and all the rest of it. When suddenly he's given the call, so he flies to Berlin on the 17th of August. And then finds himself kind of sort of completely transported to what feels to him like a completely different world. People are just sort of, out in the streets, going about their business. And no one seems to be interested in the kind of the life and death struggle that's going on across the channel. Beautiful weather, Germany swathed in peaceful serenity. It seems to him that the burden of the German war effort is now resting on the kind of shoulders of him and, his fellow comrades in the Luftwaffe. Göring's frustration with the way the battle's going is absolutely clear, even though all those present at the conference are insisting they've inflicted huge and very crippling losses on the RAF by this stage. But they clearly haven't destroyed the British fighter force or indeed the RAF full stop in the 3 days as planned.
And they know that because every time they turn up, they're attacked by Fighter Command. Göring he's groping around for, other people's mistakes, so tactical reasons for things having gone wrong. He says it's the fighters who are to blame here.
Well, it can't be the dive bombers.
And because he's a fighter pilot as well, he can claim expertise, right?
Yeah.
He says what we need is 3 Gripen of fighters should protect 1 Gripen of bombers.
He reiterates this, close escort of the fighters, which is exactly the opposite of what he said a month earlier.
He was right a month earlier, but he doesn't know he was right. I mean, his judgment. You can't credit him with having got it right, really.
No, and he's finger pointing to hide his own deficiencies, isn't he?
Yeah.
The problem's the bombers, not the fighters. The problem is he hasn't got enough aircraft to do the job he needs to do, which is to pulverise airfields. These are huge areas. They're sort of 100 acres in size of grass. You need a hell of a lot of bombs. General Wefer, in 1936, he was the chief of staff of the Luftwaffe, was planning a long-range heavy strategic bomber force, 4-engine heavy bomber force. And he dies, gets taken over, his position takes over by Kesselring, and that plan is abandoned.
But even if they'd had that,
they wouldn't have enough.
Because the task is too enormous.
But clearly dive bombing, on which they've put so much emphasis in their bomber strategy for the war, isn't working.
That's become apparent during the Canal Camp.
He says, I'm now going to withdraw the Stukas.
Yeah.
That's an incredible decision when you think the whole German bomber policy of the Luftwaffe is based around dive bombing. First of all, the Stuka, then to give dive bombing capabilities to the Ju-88. They're now developing a heavy bomber, the Heinkel 177, which now has to have dive bombing capabilities. Dive bombing is central to their whole bombing strategy, and he's now withdrawing his dive bombers from the battle.
Yeah. He thinks he can turn it round, right?
Yeah.
With these new measures.
He's just giving sort of totally bonkers instructions. So he says, right, now we're not just going to attack the airfields, we're also going to attack the aircraft industry as well. So during the day, these should be carried out by lone raiders, he says.
Yeah.
The odd Ju-88 or whatever, making the most of cloud to enable them to carry out surprise attacks. But the point is if it's cloudy, you can't see the target. So that's problematic. Further attacks are going to be carried out at night But the problem is that so far night bombing attacks haven't been any more successful than those of the British, i.e. not really very much at all.
Yeah.
So for example, between the 14th and the 23rd of August, the Bristol Aeroplane Company at Filton has been selected to attack 8 times, but bombs only fell on it twice and none of them actually hit anything critical. In fact, in the whole of that time, only one night bomber claimed to have successfully hit the Rolls-Royce works at Crewe, but actually hadn't and got that wrong. So in other words, there's just not enough bombers.
Well, and it's bloody difficult.
It's
this
bloody
is really,
difficult.
really hard what they're trying to do.
Clearly the best way is to go in low and on your own, but as that attack on Middle Wallop proved, the rub is that you then get shot down yourself.
But navigation at low level is very hard anyway.
Yeah.
Because you need a rolling map. You can't tell where you are.
Yeah. So clearly precision bombing doesn't work. So the only way you can do effective bombing is mass bombing over an area.
I mean, it's interesting to see the Luftwaffe arrive at a conclusion pretty much straight away that the British take a long time to come to
but
this.
The problem is that's mass bombing, and they don't have mass bombers.
They've
got 100 or a few hundred at any one time, but they haven't got a mass.
The Luftwaffe's problems stem from the people who are in charge of it, and the fact that you're using a land army supporting weapon to try and perform a task the other side of a strip of ocean. In a strategic role. They're trying to re-roll and they can't do it.
Well, it's amazing. Of the 21 biggest attacks on airfields and RAF stations since the 13th of August, 9, or just over 40%, were nothing to do with fighter command at all.
But then if you don't know if fighter command exists, you might make that mistake.
Well, this is the interesting thing. It's not really clear whether Schmidt and the Luftwaffe High Command do know whether the commands or not commands, but there's no mention of it. So it suggests that they don't.
There's some mystery in its incoherence.
Yeah.
Göring makes his pep talk. And he's been doling out some medals at this occasion as well, isn't he? So Galland is decorated. There is a sort of bauble culture. Certainly, if you fall under Göring's purview, he'll give you some medals. That'll keep you happy. That'll shut you up, and it kind of works. Lots of these people are susceptible to that stuff.
Yeah.
He says at the end of this, and your Göring is better than mine. So
we have reached the decisive period of the air war against England. The vital task is to turn all means at our disposal to the defeat of the enemy air force.
Again.
Yeah. Haven't we already been doing that?
Exactly.
Yeah. Anyway.
There's a critical moment, and I think this is really, really interesting. And we've just talked about how difficult night bombing is, how precision bombing is basically, it's a complete misnomer. There is no such thing
as precision bombing.
24th, 25th of August, several German bombers, and they're trying to hit the air.
No one seems to be able to hit Rochester.
And they mistake the Thames for the Medway on their way to Rochester, and they hit London. They drop bombs on London in Millwall, Tottenham and Islington. Interestingly, Hitler and Göring have both ruled out bombing London. They've said we can't do that. Interesting, the Nazis are concerned about escalation against Britain. The next morning, Churchill and the War Cabinet say, right, well, we're going to attack Berlin then.
Yeah.
Because they don't know this is an accident. This means that Bomber Command then makes its way to Berlin. And this is an interesting escalation, and a completely accidental one.
There's a really interesting fellow who's involved in this. He's got Group Captain Tommy Elmhurst. He's one of the guys from Air Intelligence who's on the Joint Intelligence Committee, the JIC, which still exists to this day. And he thinks this is a terrible mistake because he says at present, his point is that at that moment, on the 25th of August, the Luftwaffe raids on the airfields haven't really caused huge amount of damage in the big scheme of things. And so he thinks, well, it'd be quite good if they continued. On the other hand, any attack on Berlin is bound to bring retaliatory raids on London, which he then thinks might actually prove pretty bad.
Well, yeah, because after all, people are very, very worried about bombing civilians and the political effect it'll have.
Exactly. So he mentions his fears to the Deputy Chief of the Air Staff, who then puts his case to the Prime Minister, but the War Cabinet is not to be swayed. So, Bomber Command has been sending over bombers over Germany since the night of the 16th, 17th of May 1940. And have sent way more bombers over Germany at night time than Luftwaffe has sent bombers over Britain.
Yeah.
By miles over the past few months.
Yeah.
They've been spraying bombs all over the place. They haven't really hit anything. The first they do go over on the night of the 25th, 26th of August is complete damn squib, really. 50 bombers sent. Berlin's swathed in cloud. They can't see anything. Only a handful of bombs actually fall on the city. They destroy a wooden summer house. And they wound one person. On the way back, having encountered heavy winds, the Hamptons particularly struggle to get back. 3 are lost and 3 have fallen into the North Sea. So that's 6 down. At this point, of course, crews are flying completely independently, given absolutely zero guidance about how best to get there. So there's no kind of, dodge the flak at the Hook of Holland or anything like that. Off you go and just see what's what. And there's an American journalist in Berlin at the time called William Shari, who doesn't think that Berliners are affected at all.
Yeah.
Except that there is some psychological shock to this.
Well, Göring has famously said, "You can call me Maya," and if bombs hit Berlin, you call me Maya. And there's some disagreement about what he means by Maya, because that's like a German surname like Smith or Williams or Jones or whatever, or is he saying it's a Jewish name, and you can call me a Jew for letting this happen. But Berliners call him Maya. They take him at his word, and of course the German press. Goebbels immediately, this is a fantastic piece of propaganda, isn't it? Look how cowardly the British are. The British talk about a high moral plane, but here they are bombing civilians, all this sort of stuff. But it actually means, and this is the beginning of a big distortion of the German war economy. You've got to defend Berlin, so you need anti-aircraft guns, you need to build shelters.
And if you've got anti-aircraft guns over Berlin, they can't be on the battlefield.
Yeah, exactly.
And 18, shelters, huge shelters for 18,000 people, that's going to cost you. So they fly over a fourth time on the 31st of August, aiming for Tempelhof. Again, the damage isn't considerable, but again, it proves that Berlin is far from impregnable. That's the key point. It reminds the Germans that the war's not over at all, and the idyll of the victory summer has sort of been shattered.
I mean, do you think at this point in the Ukraine war, once it obviously was working out for the Russians in the first sort of year, there's a lot of talk of off-ramps for Putin. What's his off-ramp? No, clearly he's not interested in off-ramps. But what's Hitler's off-ramp at this point? Because he controls the German press. Goebbels controls the press. They'd be able to say, well, we're going to leave the British Empire to stew. Because this is going nowhere, this campaign of theirs. They're frittering away and absolutely...
The RAF are on their knees. They're just about to win.
No, Jim.
One last effort.
No, Jim, but...
One final push.
We often talk about when does Germany lose the Second World War, and you're like Christmas 1941.
Well, it's here.
Well, this is where we're now escalating our estimation of that. But the point, they've lost the Battle of Britain. They've already lost the Battle of Britain, the Germans.
Hitler knows that he must beat Britain or lose the war.
Yeah. Isn't there another way out for him here? Because the British government is also reliant on German aggression at this point to shore up its current policy and position, right? Entirely reliant on German aggression. Churchill needs Germany to struggle with him.
Why do you think they're attacking Berlin?
Well, yeah, exactly. It's just so interesting, because if the Germans had any clear sense of what's going on, they'd sack this off now. They'd say Britain is irrelevant to the war. It's a faded power. It's done. Yeah. Our concern is the continent of Europe. They kind of leave Churchill hanging. How can he could possibly maintain a continued aggressive position? How can he entertain the Americans in a continued aggressive position if the Germans don't carry on being aggressive? Do you see what I mean?
Yeah. And Hitler, because he controls the media, he just says, I've decided actually not to bother with Britain anymore.
Exactly. And the media go, Britain is irrelevant. We've subdued the RAF. They can say we've won.
Yeah.
They can lie about how they've won, but they don't, because there never was a strategy ever in any of this, because it's one long tale of mission creep. Extracting yourself for the Germans is basically impossible. Because it's a turning point for the British, yes, that they defeat the Germans. It's a turning point for the Germans that they can't extricate themselves from this. They maintain the war with Britain as much as Britain maintains the war with Germany.
Well, I completely agree with you. It's obviously the sensible thing to do, because if you're not going to win immediately, that's very much the German way. But it's also assuming that your enemy hasn't got a vote. And this is the point, is actually the RAF have been flying over continually. And they're not just flying over Berlin. They're not just flying over targets in Germany. They're also attacking airfields. And, they're flying over Germany nightly, and even Italy.
Yep.
Blenheims particularly are continuing to do daily missions on those airfields in the Pas-de-Calais, that target-rich environment. Yeah. On the 23rd of August, for example, 19 Blenheims sent over. Yeah.
If I have to pick being in fighter or bomber command at this point in the war,
I'm going
picking fighter command every single day of the week. Because this is terrible, terrible bloody work. The crews are really copping it.
And they don't really know what to do. They're now going off in pairs.
Yep.
So one's going in at 20,000 feet, the other's cruising at 50 feet. I mean, it's sort of, the idea is to sort of pull off the defence from one and then attack with the other.
And they switch to night bombing.
And, there's plenty of evidence to suggest that bombers coming over at night is keeping the Luftwaffe awake, because they talk about it when they get captured and their conversations are bugged. But the bottom line is, yet again, we've said it before, say it again, this is all new.
Yeah.
People are kind of working it out. But clearly going over in daylight, is not good. But there's a point for the Luftwaffe of that because they've got new airfields, and because they haven't got an air defence system, how do you protect your airfields while the others are out attacking Britain? Well, you have to have two back.
Yeah.
Defending the airfields.
Yeah.
So you have observers on the coast.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, they raise the alarm. You are, as a pilot, strapped into your Messerschmitt 109. As soon as someone gets a call, off you go and you try and intercept that Blenheim. But that's not great, because that's two planes that then can't be flying over England.
Shall we take a quick break?
Yeah.
And then return with the battle continuing at considerable intensity? We'll see you in a moment. Cheerio. Welcome back to We Have Ways to Make You Talk. Episode 4 of our Battle of Britain series, and this is the attritional phase of the Battle of Britain. Phase 3. Although, as we've discussed, really this is the point for the Germans to throw in the towel and give up.
But they're not giving up.
They're not going to do that.
And what's really clear is that the Luftwaffe fighter pilots particularly are feeling very put upon.
Yeah.
They're being overworked, overflown. They're not being appreciated. And I think it's interesting that the Luftwaffe has a far greater culture of sort of talking shop.
Yeah.
Than fighter command. So fighter command, once you're stood down for the end of the day, don't talk about it.
Yeah.
Go off and think about something else. But that's not the way. After the Luftwaffe has stood down, you write up your reports and all the rest of it. I mean, Oberleutnant Hayo Hermann, a fellow I met several times, and terrifying individual he was too. but he would spend his evenings writing up papers on his theories of how bombing should be conducted, and spent most of his time in contemplative study every evening. In the first group of JG-52, which is where Ulrich Steinhilper is, there's a huge amount of tactical discussion amongst the pilots. And, they'd have supper in the evening once they're stood down, and maybe some wine, a glass of wine or two, but they'd still be just talking shop.
Yeah.
And Steinhilper wrote, all of the pilots, NCOs and officers would gather, and lively discussions would usually ensue. These were generally toned by the events of the day. Losses would quieten us down and bring a mood of introspection. Whereas success would bring in a surplus of energy and excitement. Yeah.
Rather than let's tomorrow is another day.
Yeah. But they're all really pissed off about the close bomber escort, which makes no sense. These are the guys that are having to do the flying. They know what they're about. They know this is a terrible idea. And it's really interesting, isn't it, that later on in the war, when Ira Aker insists on close escort for the fighters, it doesn't work. Doolittle comes in January 1944 and says, forget that. Your job is to take out any fighters you see and strafe the airfields and all the rest of it, which is exactly what they should have been doing in 1940. Yeah. So it's kind of in reverse. It's really interesting how the same mistake is repeated. But, most believe that they should be having free hunts.
Yeah.
That they should be allowed to go off and attack what they want and clear the skies ahead of the bombers. And on the 19th of August, his Stafford goes on a free hunt. They do a ground attack on Manston, which has already been abandoned, by the way. But there are still some planes on the ground, and he speeds towards the airfield and sees a fuel bowser and opens fire, explodes, destroying 2 Spitfires in the process. It makes him realise, this is what you can do with cannons and machine guns flying at kind of over 300 miles an hour. Then comes Churchill's great speech of the 20th of August. He knows this is a sort of big moment in the air battle. He does repeat his line about the feud, but he also singles out Bomber Command, I think, which is interesting.
On no part of the Royal Air Force does the weight of the war fall more heavily than on the daylight bombers.
Well, he's spot on about that.
Yeah, because he's seen the casualty figures. They're sky high, aren't they? 693 aircraft lost. And that's 191 since the fall of France. So
235 men just in August.
Yeah. But the fighter pilots are the poster boys, although that famously that photo...
The one of the guy laughing, who's got the head with his leather helmet on and all the rest of it, and that's the one that's on Picture Post. It is the iconic picture of a member of the few. Gilman's only 19 at the time, and it doesn't appear on Picture Post until the 31st of August, by which time he's been killed 6 days earlier.
God.
Really sad, yeah. Flying on the 25th of August.
God, imagine being his family.
Well, they don't know he's dead at that point. He's just missing.
They know he's missing. I mean, there he is.
Absolutely cruelest thing, isn't it?
That is,
we always said the British are ruthless. But while the kind of sense of panic might have gone, and the sense that the British are kind of sort of getting used to this, and the chatter of machine guns overside this drone of engines and contrails high above the cerulean skies, etc., there is this respite between the 19th and 23rd of August where Park and Dowding particularly can sort of dust themselves down, patch up the airfields, rotate some squadrons, exhausted pilots can catch up on sleep and all the rest of it. But there is also a sense that there's more to come. And Dowding and Park very much feel on edge about experienced pilot shortage. That's the big thing. So on the same day that Göring has his conference at Curran Hall on the 19th of August, Air Vice Marshal Park of 11 Group takes the opportunity to circulate kind of his new instructions to his ground controllers in 11 Group. And this is really interesting. It's because Park is repeatedly adjusting things. And high on the list of orders not to venture far from land. Don't go out oversea. You know, we cannot afford to lose pilots through forced landings in the sea, he says. And as a rule of thumb, Park now orders Spitfires direct against the enemy fighters and Hurricanes against the bombers. And at the same time, only a minimum number of squadrons are to engage enemy fighters. Because obviously, the more you engage, the more casualties you're going to have. So you want to keep them to absolute minimum. You need to protect your airfields. So really, the most important thing is to not be on the ground when the Luftwaffe come. Now, obviously, you want to shoot them down, but actually shooting down is not the priority. Priority is survival. And it's not that he's worried about numbers of Spitfires and Hurricanes. He's worried about pilots.
Because they're in for the long haul. They're not trying to win this in 3 or 4 days, like the other side.
It's about holding on.
12 Group is about to enter the chat, which is the middle of England. So East Anglia, Mercia, Wales. They're being asked to protect airfields in 11 Group. So once 11 Group's aircraft are up, you then protect the airfields from 12 Group, because that's their best option for being effective. So the controllers are calling 12 Group to the fight, and this is going to become a bone of contention, isn't it?
Yeah, it is going to become a bone of contention because 10 Group do exactly what they're asked to do and 12 Group basically don't. Yeah. But they've also got another asset, which is the Poles and the Czechs, which are starting to come in. And the big problem with them has been language, because this is a system. You have to have it, where you're being ground controlled. You have to be able to understand. This is not a free-for-all flying. The Germans might be able to kind of incorporate a different language squadron, but Fighter Command cannot until they can all understand what they're being told. Yeah. So this is why there's been these teething issues. Now, the Poles and Czechs are all chomping a bit, wanting to get going. But there is a reason for this. So they bring them in gradually. I think 302 at Duxford gets in by literally about the 20th of August, something like that. But 303 squadron is a little bit later, which is based at Northolt in 11 Group. And what they are allowed to do now is patrol inland airfields and patrol North London. There is this sort of sense that the British are all too conservative and too stuffy and therefore, not using this fantastic asset. That is not the point. There's a very, very good reason for not using the Poles until they do.
Because you're being directed onto target, the idea is everyone knows where everyone is. If you're just randomly tooling around, you might be mistaken for German aircraft, even though we do have IFF and we do have Huff-Duff and all that sort of stuff. And so fighters might be directed onto you. Everyone needs to know where everyone is, because that's how the Dowding system works.
Quite right too. Anyway, the air battles renew with a vengeance on the 24th of August, suddenly the weather clears again. So Manston's so heavily bombed that it's decided to completely evacuate it at that point. 9 people are killed at North Weald. And on that same day, Flight Lieutenant B. Beaumont of 87 Squadron is coming back from a 48-hour leave, and he drives straight to the perimeter track to see how B Flight are getting on before heading into Exeter to get changed. But actually, they're scrambled immediately. And just after 5 o'clock, he hastily puts on his main vest and harness over his uniform and dashes to his Hurricane, takes off with the rest of them. Some 16 aircraft in all, and they're now flying Finger 4s, which I think is really interesting. So they speed towards Warmwell, and B. Beaumont spots 8 dots, which then become twin-engine bombers, then another 5, then another 6, then another 5, and before he knows where they are, there's 100 of the bastards. And he's desperately scanning the skies for enemy fighters. And as he does so, the squadron tear into the leading bombers, and Beaumont opens fire on a Dornier 17, which he sees roll over and just after one burst and head down to the ground. And he now wonders whether he should be using the speed of his dive to make a split turn and then head back into the fray. But glancing back at the lines of tracer, he sees 109s are already in amongst them. This all happens so quickly. You get a sense of sort of the melee and the sort of confusion of it all. So he continues diving, and when eventually pulls out, briefly blacks out a result of negative G. Now he's at around 5,000 feet above Dorchester. But up above him, he looks up and he can still see this sort of incredibly confused action flying on, and suddenly a burning hurricane hurtles past him, a livid ball of flame followed by a wheel leg from a bomber. He climbs back up again, sees a 109 dart from a cloud, evidently intent on heading back home sneakily. So Beaumont turns on his tail, and the German pilot spots him and brakes left, but he fires across the turning circle, and Beaumont sees his de Waal strike his own tracer bullets hit the fuselage, and the German kind of half rolls and dives, and Beaumont follows him, unleashes another burst, And this is the crippling blow on the 109, and suddenly it's slowing. So the German deliberately stalls and drops, and he dives down and sideslips into a field near Abbotsbury with a sort of thick trail of smoke following him down. And Beaumont watches it hit the ground, and the Messerschmitt slews amidst a cloud of dust and smoke. He then circles over and sees the pilot clamber out on the wing, far into his machine with his flare gun. Flames lick from the cowling, and then the German raises his hand, as Beaumont roars over him. And actually, we know who this pilot is. He's Gefreiter Broker from the first Staffel JG-53.
Amazing. But he's already been set upon by a Spitfire.
As far as Beaumont's concerned, he shot him down, but he hasn't. He's already been hit.
Then he flies back to Exeter, finds the squadron are back, but someone's been shot down. Sergeant James Cowley's been shot down and wounded. And then, this is a terrible postscript. Peter Cumley flies in. He's the last man back in his Hurricane. And as he's approaching the airfield, his plane suddenly flips and dives towards the ground. And it's been completely shot up, and he's basically not made it at the last gasp.
He's probably died from loss of blood, yeah.
Yeah.
Then on the 25th of August, there's some super races emerging amongst the Luftwaffe. Galland is one, Helmut Wick is another. He claims 2. He's now the leading scorer in the Luftwaffe with 22 in the Battle of Britain. He's awarded the Knight's Cross a couple of days later.
But the Germans have this culture of Experten. The idea is that your experienced pilots, squadrons of Staffel are built around them. The idea is you let the ace do his thing and everyone else is his wingman, basically. And Neumann, who's flying with Galland, he knows that this is how it's working, right? You end up with this culture.
You work as a team, but the team is around the team hero.
In this essence, Galland is a team player as long as he's captain.
Right. And everyone knows that people want to be the expert, but you're not allowed to flaunt it, but everyone knows that that's what they're secretly doing.
Yeah.
And you're accused of having a sore throat.
Yeah, for wanting your Knight's Cross.
Yes.
And they're also known as Dödel. Yeah. Hans-Bob Eckhard says a dödel is a rude name for a penis. So it's basically you're a big dick. You're a big swinging dick pilot. Or there's the other end of the scale, which is canal crank, where you're channel sick. You're sick of the English Channel. It goes in both directions, that doesn't it? Because for some people that means they're desperate to get across and shoot the enemy down. For other people it means they are really obsessed with the fact they're flying over the sea and they hate it. There's the two ends of the scale, isn't there? Encouraging the sort of superhero pilot, and then the other poor schlubs at the end who are meant to cover his tail.
The other thing about this is Göring's mob, so he likes his costumes and he likes his good look. And they're the newest, shiniest part of the Wehrmacht, and he wants them to look good. So they all have a dazzling array of uniforms. They have leather jackets and dark blue summer jackets, and they have breeches and leather trousers and boots and and all sorts of stuff. Whereas the RAF get a blue suit basically. Yes. And the kind of nod to their own exceptionalism in fighter command is that you have the top button undone rather. That's your sign on your suit. And you don't have to wear a tie because you're constantly craning your neck, so you don't want to get chafing around your neck, which is why they have the silk scarves. But both sides, you become an ace when you've shot down 5, but it's an unofficial thing.
Well, and the idea is that it's a team effort, isn't it, rather than an ace effort. And there are aces.
Well, I think most anyone who knows anything about the Battle of Britain might have heard of Ginger Lacey, but that was mainly because he wrote a very famous book about his time. But has anyone heard of Eric Locke?
No.
Has anyone heard of Arthur McKellar?
No.
Okay, well, they were number 2 and they were 1 and 3 and the highest scoring aces in the Battle of Britain. Again,
the contrast in cultures is really, really, it's everything, isn't it?
Yes, but there is a commonality. The commonality is that both sides, by this last few days in August 1940,
are really feeling the strain.
The expectation on these young men flying these planes is absolutely enormous. Yeah. And I thought it was really telling. Do you remember when we were talking to Clive Denny? Yeah. He was flying a Hurricane and he was going, seriously, you don't want to be flying more than about an hour a day in this.
Yeah.
And these guys are, fighter command, less so. Occasionally you might fly 4 sorties. 1 time a day is quite a lot. 2 times is more. 4 times you're really, really pushing it. There are Luftwaffe fighter pilots that are flying kind of 5 or 6 times a day because of this pressure on the fighter pilots to escort the bombers. And there's not enough of them, which means they're having to fly more to maintain the effort with the bombers.
And, of course, the German campaign is supposed to have ended by now. They're being promised jam tomorrow, aren't they? And there is none. And every time they go, someone's lost. and doesn't come back, whereas an RAF squadron might go into the air, someone might get shot down, but he might turn up that evening. So there's not a sense of invulnerability in fighter command, but there's at least a sense of regeneration and a possibility of regeneration. Whereas once you head across the channel, if you're a Luftwaffe pilot, that could be the last time anyone sees you. The pressure's mounting. Berlin has been bombed, which means the gloves are off. And in our next episode, we'll look at how the battle shifts and how we make our way towards Battle of Britain Day. Thanks for listening or watching. Tally ho!
Tally ho!